Hey everybody, this is Leon the Star, and in this video I will do a small breakdown of the recent live performance Balaton Funk for the Balaton EP, where all tracks basically use the same sample. So what is actually very important is that I'm using the SRFP technique from a previous video. Check the link in the description. And yeah, let's go. This is the first step, the S of SRFP, source. As you can see, the pattern name ends with the $sign, which means source. And here I basically collected the idea and the drum sounds, which I'm gonna use for this EP. So this is how it sounds. It's basically three things. It's sounds in the foreground, like chords, and you know, the more complicated, complex, arpeggiating, fast sounds, they are more in the background. On top of that, the third one is the drums. All this together, I basically resampled to one sample using shift record. And this is basically the next phase, the R of SRFP, resample. So I resampled the drums and the you know, chords, etc. into one sample, and then I basically processed that sample with all kinds of effects. I already had reverb set on the melodic stuff, but I also added some, if I remember correctly, I added the sustainer to make it sort of like, to compress it without, you know, any, it's a very transparent sustainer, so I did that. Plus, then I added a little bit of decimation and a little bit of bit crusher on top of that, just enough so that when you pitch it down, it will sound very nice and gritty. And then I went ahead to the next step, which is flush. First, I saved the resampled sample, the final one, using the export sample. Then I turned it off, which basically wipes out all the other temporary samples which I used for processing, etc. And then I basically had my, you know, my fresh start again. I loaded up the sample after turning the machine on again. And then I was basically ready to go to the next step, which is the performance pattern. Now I'm going to start a real pattern with beats, etc. I basically set the resampled sample to all these channels, and I pinpointed the positions using the edit parameter. And then I basically started with a pattern. I think I actually started with something with a beat like this, because I basically, you know, start filling up channels, beats. Another thing to note is that I basically started my songs with the limiter set to the master effect, and I completely set it to the max. The reason why I do this is that I found this to be a very, very nice setup, because I don't know if you notice it, but if I turn on and off the kick, you get a bit of this pumping effect, which I think is really nice. And the best way to do this is basically having the same kick. These are copies, these two. One of them go to the limiter and the other to the dry. And this is the dry version. I don't know if you can hear it, but it's basically the tail of the kick with all the sub. And it also has a bit of an attack. And this is important because if it doesn't have the attack, then you get a big peak because of the copy, the other copy. So this is one, this is dry. This gives you the bass frequencies. And then the other one, as you can see, is going to the master effect. This is slamming into the limiter. And you might not hear this, but it's actually very short. It's quite short compared to the dry one, and it also, this is very important, has an attack. And so the tick you're hearing is not from the kick sample, it is from the limiter. And this is why it's very important, like if you set the attack to 0 and you send the kick to the limiter, you will get a tick. It might sound nice, but it's a huge problem. The problem is that everything else which is going into the limiter will have no chance anymore and is gonna sound very weak. So whenever you put a kick or snare or whatever into a limiter, you want to slam it. Make sure you add some attack to it. There should be a bit of a ramp so that the limiter can sort of, create a click sound for your percussion in a very nice way without getting a sort of double click which sort of destroys your mix. So this is very important. The same goes for the snare. This snare also has a bit of an attack. This is a really cool setup. I really suggest that you play around with this one. And don't worry, if you use reverb in your resampled sample, it's okay. You won't miss a lot. You can complain about that you cannot use the reverb anymore, but it's not such a big deal. Reverb is, by the way, just noise, if you think about it. So I basically started with this, and then, so I had this originally on 41, so I basically saved this a bit further so that I could basically trim the fat of the previous copies so that I could start with something like this, which has some channels muted. Fill-in pattern, which basically transitions to the beat drop using the chain. So I think this is basically it. If you listen to the melodic sounds, you will hear that the sound is not stopping. This is because it's a ping pong loop. I have a video on this as well. This is very, very useful to, get the most out of your resampled sample and out of your sample time, because it's basically going back and forth. It's a never-ending sample. And it's very useful to create very nice layered sounds. Again, you don't need a reverb. You can even fake reverb-like feelings by just having, layering different stuff in a very soft way in the background. It's absolutely doable. So well, I will not go into this. I have a whole video on ping pong looping, but this is basically it. And then I also created another copy. So this is basically the same sample, but I just, transposed it, I think using the pitch glide, or perhaps even via the transpose option here. Also the other drums, the snare drum, they are, I think, going to the limiter as well. The reason why this is going to the limiter is that it really reacts very well with the kick drum. Check. You get the first few milliseconds of the snare, and then you get the kick. This is what I personally prefer, because if it wouldn't be, it sounds very, I don't know. Check this out. Well, it sounds okay, but it takes up a lot of attention, and you want that attention to go somewhere else when the beat drops. I'm also using sometimes the groove depth, let me see, not this time, but the push because if you then use a groove, that it will basically go a bit forward in time. This is very extreme, of course, but you get the idea. If you want this first part of a clap or of a snare, just use this technique. This is how I sort of made it, and I hope this helps, because for me personally, I'm really happy with the limiter. It's a really nice limiter, and it also made me realize that, you know, these limiters and compressors on the electrides are extremely aggressive. You get a sort of click transient, very loud one, very easily, but the key is to basically put more attack on your drum sounds. And this also applies to the Electribe SX, which has an attack feature. You can basically use the envelope generator. It's a negative envelope, I think. And then with a very short time, it basically does a fade in, which is the same. So I hope this helps. I hope you enjoyed it, and see you in the next video.